He's definitely brutal, he's always savage, and you're definitely getting wrecked.
The Royal Road is terminology which originates in Korean StarCraft Brood War competition, but has now permeated esports, particularly Korean esports, into other games. For example, in League of Legends, most recently in the summer split of this year in 2018, Team Griffin were rookies going into the final against KT Rolster and almost won the championship. In Overwatch, there was a successful Royal Road accomplishment by GC Busan in OGN Apex, but the term originally meant a rookie player who, upon qualifying for his first ever OSL on GameNet Star League, the premier 1v1 league in Korean StarCraft Brood War, wins that very first season in which he qualifies. So it's a great term generally to be used in esports. Basically, wherever the biggest league is, the first time you qualify for it, if you win it that very first season, your debut, your rookie season, then you've walked the royal road. It's as if you are royalty, meant to win, bred to win. You are just something special in contrast to other people who take time to work up to it. So as I say, it was used more generally, but it originally just meant for the OSL. Now, funnily enough, it was later then applied by fans to the MSL, the other big 1v1 league in Korean StarCraft Brood War, considered not to have the same prestige and tradition, but for my money, actually a better league overall and with better champions generally. But it was, I will point, not used by the MSL themselves in MBC game because it was a trademarked term for on GameNet. Now, the flaws of this terminology, unfortunately, because no terminology is going to be flawless, is first of all, there are players who tried to qualify many times for OSLs and were already top pros, and in fact, in a very particular instance, even a multiple-time champion and one of the greatest players of all time, who, because they didn't qualify for the OSL many, many times, when they finally qualified, that was classified as walking the royal road, even though in the spirit of being a rookie, being a beginning player, that doesn't really truly work, even though it did fit the technical criteria. Likewise, there's another flaw to it, which is when people use the term Royal Road to describe whoever won the first ever edition of that league. Because logically, someone had to walk the Royal Road there. It's the first ever time anyone could qualify, and there is going to be a winner. So that's also not really in the spirit of it. Because part of what makes it the Royal Road for other players is that they're going against veteran players and established players and former champions, and they still win their first ever season. They don't need any warm-up, any build-up, any learning from certain lessons. They're able to win the first time. And so our first ever Royal Roader in StarCraft Korean Brood War in the OSL was indeed someone who just won the first OSL. And that was the Canadian player, French-Canadian, Grr, who was Grrr, 4 full stops, who was a Canadian player, as I said, came to Korea. This is the early days. This is before people like Baxter were on the scene, before people like Nada were winning. He came, this is actually a time, funnily enough, where the meta was very, very different from how it was later. And in the first ever OSL, the 2000 Hanaro OSL, the first one, he won the championship and even did so, this is how old the game was back then, how young the game was rather, and how old the meta was, that he was even race swapping from Protoss to Zerg. He wasn't even playing one race entirely. Now, the next Royal Roader, because there was a few in the early days, as the scene had a lot of turnover, was the legendary Protoss player Garimtor, and he won the 2000 Freechal OSL, which was the second ever OSL. This was an OSL notably, which featured 13 out of the 24 players were Zerg, 4 were randoms. This is before Boxer. This is before Nada. This is before Yellow were all a big deal. So none of the first generation of truly great players were on the scene, and Grimtor was able to win it. Again, this is the days when Terran and Protoss were the ones winning the OSL, and it took a long time before a Zerg, July Zerg, finally came along and was able to do it. Now, after that came a very famous player, one of the Bonjoirs, and that was Boxer. He won the 2001 Handbit Soft OSL, the third OSL, so the first 3 OSLs were all players walking the Royal Road. In doing so, kick-started the legend of Boxer, the rise of Brood War in Korea. He faced numerous quality opposition. Grr, Yellow, his longtime rival, one of the greatest uncrowned players. Kingdom, a Protoss player who was very skilled and later on went in to win championship. Into the Rain, another top Protoss at the time. Obviously, Boxer didn't just accomplish this. He went on to a legendary career. 2 OSL championships in time, an MSL, numerous runner-up finishes. After that, Another fitting player to have walked the Royal Road was the first Zerg to win an OSL, and that was July Zerg, now shortened to July. He won the 2004 Gillette OSL. That's how many years it took until a Zerg won, because of how fucked that race was in the early days. He was the first Zerg to win a big individual league. He beat Prime Ilovuv, who at the time was the best player in the world and already a 2-time MSL champion, and on a 25-0 TVZ streak. And he beat him in the semi-finals 3-2 in an epic series. He went on to the final where he played Reach, also a great player, also an OSL champion, and he defeated him there. July would himself go on to a legendary career, eventually winning 3 MSLs and therefore the Golden Mouse. After that, we had a Protoss player. We had Anytime from Hwasong Oz. He won the 2005 SO1 OSL. Now, despite himself only having a 54% overall win rate, Anytime was a PVT specialist, and obviously PVT was the traditional imbalance in race between Protoss and Terran, although not as imbalanced as the other matchups at the time. He had a 73.33% win rate and was able to play a whole bunch of Terrans the whole way through the playoffs. So in the round of 8, he met Zelos, who was an OSL champion from 2 years earlier, a World Cyber Games champion, numerous top 4 finishes in individual leagues, but TVP was his worst matchup. In the semi-finals, he too met Ilovuv. He beat him 3-1, and Ilovuv at this point in time, 3-time MSL champion, had won his first OSL championship. In the final, he played Boxer, who was going for the Golden Mouse, his 3rd OSL championship. He denied Boxer that. It was Boxer's 4th attempt at the Golden Mouse, unsuccessful, and this was a 3-2 final, so Boxer came really close. After this, we have another Zerg player. We have the aforementioned, or alluded to, Savior, who won the 2006 Shinhan Bank OSL Season 3. He was the 2nd Zerg player to win an OSL, but as I said and alluded to, he was already an elite player. He'd already won 3 MSL championships, winning the Golden Badge. He'd been in 4 straight finals in the MSL prior to this MSL. Indeed, making it to this OSL final, also qualified for his 5th MSL final. It's just that he had never qualified for the OSL up until this point in his career. It's actually a very overlooked part of his career, which is willfully omitted and ignored when people pin his dominance. They disingenuously omit that information. Now, this is a guy, though, who absolutely earned this championship. He had an insane performance against Terran players in a bad map pool era and when TVZ was a very strong matchup for Terrans. In the round of 16, he went 2-1 against Midas, a quality Terran player. He went 3-2 against Iris, again, this time one of the younger ones, but a top talent of Terran. And in the final, he played against Nada, then considered the greatest player in history, the most winningest player in history, with his 6 championships, 3 OSL, 3 MSL, and he beat him 3-1 in the final to deny Nada a 4th OSL championship. Nada was a bonjour. Nada was the reigning OSL champion from the previous season, trying to go back-to-back as only Boxer at that point in history had done. And this was, most notably, Nada's last ever final. Funnily enough, the parallel final in the MSL would end up being Savior's last final, but yes, this was the end of Nada's run. Then we had the final OSL Royal Roader, which fittingly enough was Jaedong. He won the 2007 ever OSL. He had beaten Terrans to get to the final. ZVT was his best matchup. In the final, he played at that point in time, one of the best players, Stork, the Protoss player, who went on to be an all-time great player and later OSL champion. And quite frankly, Jaedong was supposed to lose this final. Stork, funnily enough, was sick at the time at PVT. Very, very good. He had won the group stage game between the 2 players. Jaedong's ZVP was actually his worst matchup at the point, but everyone remembers this was sort of the birth of the Tyrant, the birth of the legendary Jaedong, who could win from difficult scenarios, famously the EE hand timing attack with Mutalisks. Then he obviously went on to a legendary career himself. He won 3 OSLs and the Golden Mouse as a result, 2 MSLs, was in something like 9 or 10 finals, I think maybe 10. Fabulous career. Now in the MSL, as I said, it was not actually a term officially the Royal Road, but there were some players who completed the same feat in the MSL. So ignoring obviously Nada winning the first one, KPGA Tour, which I guess should be considered one. When it became the actual MSL, we had Nalra won the first MSL, the 2003 Stout MSL. This was the rise of Nalra. He beat Nada, already a bonjour. a bunch of championships, 3 KPGA, the predecessor to the MSL, and 1 OSL to his name. He beat Boxer, already a legend, already a multiple-time OSL champion, 2-1 in the round of 8. He beat Zeus later on, 2-0 in the semi-finals, who he actually went on to face in an OSL final later and beat. This is Nalra we're talking about here. After that, we get I Love Uv, winner of the 2003 Triggem MSL. He lost versus Nada in the first round of the upper bracket. It was a double elimination tournament, very different to the OSL at the time. He stomped the whole lower bracket, 2-0ing everyone until he got to the final where Nada took a game from me, won 3-1, and this began his reign of terror, where he would win 3 MSLs in a row, the golden badge, and become the scariest macro player perhaps ever to be seen in history. After I Love Uv, we have a future SK Telecom teammate and player he coached, Bisu, who won what was technically the 2006, what people always call it 2007 because of when the finals was, GOM TV MSL Season 1. In the group stage, he lost to Nalra, legendary Protoss player. In the semi-finals, he played Nalra, was expected to lose. This was supposed to be Nalra going back to the final to continue his holy war, as it were, against Xavier, who he'd played in the Pringles final, and then the semi-final, the next one, Pringles Season 2. Nalra was supposed to go there, make it a trilogy. Instead, Bisu beat him at 3-0 and went to the final. Even so, he was a massive underdog in the final. Xavier, in the final, had become a bonjour the week earlier by winning the OSL, beating Nada, was a 3-time MSL champion in his 5th final, famous for wrecking Protoss players, including defeating numerous times Nara, the best Protoss player in history to that point in time, arguably. And obviously, Bisu went on to his own legendary career. He won 3 MSLs, he was in 4 finals, and was one of the truly great Team League players. Then we have the last ever Royal Roader, who is Mind. He won the 2007 GOM TV MSL Season 3. In the round of 16, he beat I Love Uv, someone mentioned already, legendary Terran player, but at this point somewhat washed up, 2-1. In the semi-finals, he played another bonjour. He played Xavier. He beat him 3-2, denying a GOM Season 1 finals rematch and a chance for Xavier to potentially get revenge over Bisu. In the final, he played Bisu, reigning 2-time champion of the MSL, the best player in the world, and this was Bisu's worst matchup, admittedly, PVT, which is obviously traditionally the best matchup for Protoss players, but Bisu was very unique in that he had the worst Protoss matchup, PVZ, as his strength. Funnily enough, Mind hadn't played a single Protoss in his entire run up to that point in the final. In fact, Mind's worst matchup was TVP at only 53.85%, and he had never played Bisu in an official game before. So this was actually a very shocking result in terms of even the analysis. In doing so, he denied Bisu 3 titles in a row and potentially bonjourhood, although Bisu later on went on to get a 3rd MSL title, but a couple of seasons later. And the story came full circle. The rookie wrecked the established champion in the MSL final just as Bisu had done to Xavier. This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, godawfulwasteofspace, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear in my content? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers for upcoming content and guests? Want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today. Link in the description box.